And I believe Michelle is going to be the host for our next segment coming up, all about ARPA funds. We talked a little bit about that a little earlier, but we're going to really get deep into it. And I've got my colleagues here that are going to join me, Dionne Baux and Kelly Humrichouser. I always say your name wrong. I'm sorry about that. So let's get started with our next session.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Brown with MainStreet Hanford and a CAMS board member. Happy to be here, and this has been such a great conference so far. I'm looking forward to this session all about ARPA. We'll get some updates and case studies for success. So this is going to be a great opportunity to learn how we can advocate for our communities and get some of this funding that's coming through for the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. As Amanda mentioned, we have Kelly Humrichouser, Director of Government Relations for National Main Street. We have Dionne Baux joining us, Vice President of Urban Development for National Main Street Center. Christine Tyson with the City of Eureka, Economic Development Coordinator, and our very own Gumaro Escarcega. Sorry about my dog. Sorry, hazard of working from home. But with that, I'm going to let you guys take it away since my dog has so much to say right now. And looking forward to this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Michelle. I think I'm kicking it off here. And so my first little piece of this is just going to be to go over some of the basics, a little bit of an update on the final rule and some quick best practices that we've seen throughout the network about putting Main Street into use. And then I'll also join back at the end and we can have a little more Q&A. And I think that there's a lot of communities out there that might also have good ideas or just roadblocks to share. And maybe we can discuss through some of those if we have extra time. Earlier today, Bianca did cover a little bit of ARPA, and so I don't want to be super redundant up here at the top. But it's also great to hear it from a couple of different sides again. And I know you all have already been working on this a ton. So also, Michelle, my cat was just like screaming at me because it's almost dinner time for her here. So I feel you. So again, the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted just over a year ago. There was actually some, media coming out recently just to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of this program, and to have a lot of folks across the country kind of say, oh, how successful this has been in helping us with certain problems due to the pandemic. And it really, it did a lot, right? It has multi-utility in a lot of places. So folks have been using it for that. And we have to keep in mind too, that the $350 billion that was the state local fiscal relief fund that Bianca reminded us earlier, mostly when we're talking about ARPA, we make that reference, we're talking about that yellow highlighted $350 billion there, but ARPA included a litany of other programs, including for small businesses, but also a number of other issues related to the pandemic. As Bianca also said earlier, we're in kind of the second tranche of funding. There are two major tranches of funding, and that second tranche is kind of coming out now, coming out soon, depending on the type of government you are, size of government you are. And so communities were waiting, some were waiting on that a little bit to get going with plans, and others were also waiting on kind of final rules. So I'll touch on that too. Next slide. So and the legislation set up kind of the 4 major uses for the funds. Of course, that was to recover from economic and health impacts of the pandemic, premium pay for essential workers, which can be actually used in a number of different ways that could be helpful. So premium pay has also kind of turned into sometimes hiring incentives. When you can't replace essential workers, it also has the utility to be used to offer hiring bonuses for workers that are considered essential. And essential in the language of this is whatever your state has determined to be essential. So it does vary a little bit. Replacement for lost public sector revenue. And in between those two buckets, replacement of lost public sector revenue and premium pay, there's also a lot of hiring of city employees who might have been furloughed during the pandemic that can happen. Replacement of lost public sector revenue, as many communities are finding out, is a very fluid amount of funding. There's some changes that happen with the final rule that I'll touch on, but basically if you're designating something as replacement of lost public sector funding, you're saying we would have received this as a local government, or your city is saying we would have received this as a local government had it not been for the pandemic, and thus we can use it for anything that we would have used our regular funding for. So it has a lot more utility, broad utility to the projects that your community decides that it wants to use it for. It doesn't have as many restrictions on its use. And then infrastructure, the legislation was very clear that infrastructure uses are specifically water, sewer, and broadband. It was made clear early on through the FAQ documents that came with this funding that general economic development projects were not considered acceptable, but there's a lot of flexibility there if you can designate something as having been impacted. And so we'll talk momentarily more about that. But of course, and I'll just note too, this is actually a picture from community engagement meetings around ARPA in my community. And so my community behind me is Cleveland Heights, Ohio. We're actually still figuring out, they had decision-making such a long time ago. They had surveys and engagement processes, and they're still doing the decision-making process around exactly what the utilities of funds were. So despite the fact that we carved it out into big buckets, there's still different meetings going on to say, what might the specific uses under those buckets be? So I think that's a good example. Also, next slide. MainStreet America early on really thought, hey, let's make sure that these funds can get used for things that are going to impact our small business community. So with Patrice's leadership, we wrote an article for Brookings that kind of laid out some of the ways in which this could be utilized to support business district entities and business districts, recognizing that those had been really hard hit during the pandemic. And it's note too that, a lot of the things that were suggested in Treasury's rulemaking process by our organization and other organizations were adopted into the final rule for making this more usable in your districts. So that's a good win. So individual, obviously you can use it for individual small businesses negatively impacted by the pandemic. That seems pretty clear. If you can identify that business had a loss, you could use it to support them. It also supports the tourism and hospitality industries or other industries that are equally impacted. And the final rule also made that a little bit more clear what equally impacted meant, because that included business districts broadly. Again, you can use it for funding for bonuses, hiring incentives for essential downtown workers through that premium pay, through revenue replacement, or through the small business utility of the funds. And then, of course, the mitigation needs for businesses, including physical intervention. And you see, even, I stepped into the last conversation I heard, we're talking about parklets, some cities are, I was just reading through some different allocations, and Washington, DC set aside like 1.7 million for different road closures to have outdoor events, right? So that is still a potential use of these funds. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the final rule is kind of the next and last step in the process of Treasury's designation of what funds could be used for. So there was a lengthy period of time where it was a little bit uncertain maybe, but now they've created some finality to that, and given a lot of local governments who might have been waiting for how they were going to use funds, maybe more confidence in what they could expend this money on, or at least these are the final guardrails you're going to get. So there's no, decision making can commence. These final rule, actually, we're still in the period right now where you could reference the interim final rule or the final rule to justify your expenditure, but that ends next week. So basically, what the final rule did, I'm going to point out these three things. I'm going to tell you a couple more. So it increased utility for small businesses and business district needs broadly in a qualified census tract. If a small business is located within a qualified census tract, they are considered disproportionately impacted without having to justify further, essentially, what that impact was for the business. So a qualified census tract is really a HUD designation, mostly referring to housing, but it's used throughout Treasury's guidance here to give areas which are considered disproportionately impacted for all different different buckets and uses of ARPA. It's used in several different places. So you can look up online. There is a HUD map that tells you whether or not a portion of your community is considered a qualified census tract. If it is, the utility becomes a little bit easier for some of those uses that you might have wanted. You can say all of the small businesses within this area are considered disproportionately impacted, and thus you're able to have a broader range of approved spending categories, including storefronts and other district-wide needs that would apply to all businesses in that area. So that was one thing that I found to be great about the final rule. Second, which was really good because there were a lot of questions on this. There were some examples of use early on, but there were also a lot of questions still about capital expenditures. Can we do this big project, right? And the answer is yes. Like, there's a table in the final rule, and in the short, there's also I'll reference it later, but a shorter guide, like a 43-page guide to the final rule that was produced by Treasury, which is really useful. And it includes a table, and it says, if you are spending up to X amount of money, you don't, I think I want to say off the top of my head, it was under $1 million. There's no justification really needed for that capital expenditure. So it's opens the door to different types of uses for physical improvements to communities. And so that's good news broadly, because that was a question that was outstanding for a lot of folks. And then, the final rule, I think, also reiterates what we have known, we've known from the start, but you want to be able to identify a problem in your community and create a solution for it. And that framework is reiterated in the final rule, that if you have a negative impact, if you're saying this portion of my community was negatively impacted, you can respond in a way that meets that negative impact, right? That is proportional to that negative impact. So if you're saying, beyond, maybe beyond tourism or beyond the business district itself, if you were specifically an arts hub and that was impacted in some way, you can respond to that, even though it's not necessarily outlined as an individual use. A couple of other things that I'll note that I don't have with these fancy graphics that our communications team made, but a couple of other things would be, one, that the minimum, the final rule set a minimum that communities can choose for revenue replacement. This is largely going to be something that impacts smaller communities, not big cities. But in a smaller community, rather than doing a calculation to define what amount of funding can be considered revenue lost in the pandemic and then replaced, the community can just claim the minimum amount of $10 million. That money would then be entirely flexible, right? Because it's just considered revenue that the city lost and has been now replaced by ARPA. For a lot of communities, for small communities, that would be their entire allocation. So in that circumstance, if you are in a small community and your community chose to recognize, all the funding in that way, or a large majority of funding in that $10 million of revenue replacement, that opens a big, can do almost anything with that. That said, that could also even negatively impact some of your plans because there's more potential uses at the table, right? So if you, had been discussing with plan, now the city has this utility, they could use it for whatever infill need that they designate. And then I'll also note that the business district provision in here, it was largely kind of covered by the ability to use funds in qualified census tracts, but business districts in the interim final rule were considered an impacted industry, and they still are, but they made clear what an impacted industry was a little bit better. It's 8% essentially loss of employment, right? So if your entire business district is experiencing more than an 8% loss of employment, you could consider the entire district an impacted industry. That's still hard to measure, but they did create kind of a more clear measurement there. Any questions about that I could answer before we? Okay, cool. So a couple of things that we've noticed I've noticed, I've heard from our coordinating partners across the country and from individual communities, some of you included. There's a couple of like problems and solutions maybe, or other ways to look at it. For one thing, communities immediately responded that there's just so many local competing priorities that it makes it difficult for Main Street or small business needs to rise to the top. A lot of communities have really supported small businesses through ARPA so far, but the biggest thing here is that all of the guidance on ARPA and the reporting requirements ask you to have open community engagement processes. And there's so many communities out there that have also engaged in surveying work. Like if your community hasn't done that at this point or hasn't opened the possibility, that would be something to push for, right? Because then you could raise up your issues in a way that's not just you and the small businesses, but the entire community being able to demonstrate that that's a need. There was initial confusion or lack of confidence around the guidance that might have hindered those creative ideas, like I said, without being sure about maybe capital expenditures. But what we've seen also in a number of circumstances that if the community had a long-term vision that was articulated in planning documents, they pursued that vision with these ARPA funds, and that gave a lot of backing to say this was, or that's how the community was interpreting it, that there was a lot of backing through having had that articulated vision. And I'll give some examples at the end to include projects that were part of that vision as having been impacted by ARPA, slowed down by ARPA, and bring those to the fore. So that's when it's really possible probably to dust off some of those documents and say, no, this is a shared community vision, right? This is something that we have all agreed upon in the past. Maybe it got slowed down by ARPA. That's an applicable use of these funds. And then I'll just also note too, we had a lot of communities out there that were kind of at first, oh man, my community's only going to use these funds for broadband and sewers. And that seemed like it might have been hindering some of the small business uses. But at the same time, we have to understand about, obviously broadband is a huge need in so many of our communities and downtowns. If your sewer are not well functioning in your Main Street community, I'm not sure that you're going to have very successful street fairs and events. So we also want to make sure that we're viewing kind of those needs as very important to our small business environment. So I would include that not necessarily as a problem, but also as part of the solution. So next slide, please. So just a few other folks is, build those partnerships. Often a citywide decision-making process is going to favor an approach to small business support that also includes businesses that aren't in the downtown. We've seen a few successful cases where the Main Street manager was able to also work with city government to say, I'll handle the downtown stuff, you handle the rest of the stuff, but we'll work through the same kind of organizing structure to make sure that we're fulfilling the ARPA reporting requirements. That has been a useful way to go about it if there isn't necessarily a small business support person for the rest of the city. Again, looking to previous planning documents or replicable ideas from other communities. I'll show you again, I have links at the end of this, but there is also now a really fabulous tracking system that was developed by Brookings and the National League of Cities. And you can literally just sort through it to see what other communities are doing by the type of use that they had. And then, if you wanted to go out and find that, or frankly, if you ask us, or there's another report that we'll share that goes through a number of ideas for small businesses. There's lots of places to pull from. And then, part of the reporting requirements, part of everything that is emphasized in ARPA is the need to promote equitable outcomes and not reinforce any prior pandemic disparities. And I think when you're planning your programs, they're going to be more successful when you bring them to the community decision makers, if you are including measurements there of how you're going to ascertain that information and make sure that you are supporting something that is seeking to create a more equitable playing field for small businesses or for the district. And okay, I'm now going to turn it over to Dionne, who's really going to talk more on that last point. And Dionne, take it away.
Thanks, Kelly. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I have not been able to join you for the past 2 days, but I have heard really great things about your conference. I'm really glad to be with you here today on this Friday afternoon. And as Kelly indicated, my portion of this session will really focus on how to use ARPA funds from an equity lens And when you're talking to your city government, how can you suggest some of the projects and programs that I'm going to highlight for you today? You know, as we know, our small businesses that are Black and Brown really were highly impacted by COVID-19. And my examples are going to take you outside of California into the Midwest. But I do want to mention a couple of few examples that I've heard of recently that should have made it to the slide deck, but did not. Locally in LA, you could definitely look at Destination Crenshaw, which has been doing some really great work to support their Black and Brown businesses, but as well as, you know, increase their infrastructure locally. I would also suggest that you look at Miami's Alapata district that has been working on an equitable economic development strategy and really trying to connect very closely with the city of Miami on how to do this work. So the slide that you're looking at now is Greenwood Archer Capital. And Greenwood Archer Capital is a nonprofit community development financial institution that was funded in 2012 to supply micro and small business loans that catalyze small business development throughout the metropolitan Chicago area and suburbs, as well as the greater Cook County, Illinois. What I think is really important to note about this CDFI is that they are very intentional about supporting Black and Brown business owners, as well as women-owned entrepreneurs. The picture that you're looking at now is their pathway to enterprise for returning citizens. This program provides entrepreneurial support to groom and provide accessible capital, right? I should underline that, accessible capital to grow a new population of small businesses. These individuals were previously incarcerated individuals, and they were victims of mass incarceration that was impacted by the 13th Amendment. They have served their time and they have returned to their communities, still faced with barriers to employment and economic advancement because of their prior records. They can enroll in a PERK program using entrepreneurship as a tool for generating income and avoiding recidivism. Next slide, please. Healthy Living and a Healthy Financing Program, also funded through Greenwood Archer Capital, promotes health and wellness and seeks to eliminate food deserts in low to moderate income communities. Through this initiative, GAC provides innovative financial solutions that work to provide the right capital in a right way to local food growers, purchasers, or other entities that support the local food ecosystem. As we know, many of our distressed communities have food deserts. Programs under the HLHF incentivizes businesses to source food locally grown, enabling them to provide healthier food options in the communities in which they serve. Next slide, please. So for you football fans, your forte is a partnership with Matt Forte, a former running back for the Chicago Bears, whose commitment to Chicago Black businesses is really unyielding. Understanding the need for more Black ownership of assets, GAC, Greenwood Archer Capital, created a low-cost loan with 0% down to help Black businesses purchase commercial property, own assets, and begin creating generational wealth. Next slide. This example is a civic leader's response to really being able to support these local businesses that were being impacted. Governor J.B. Pritzker joined the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in announcing a $9 million investment to expand the Community Navigator Outreach Program to help small businesses take advantage of economic recovery grants. An expansion to the existing Community Navigator program leveraged 13 Community Navigator organizations, which MainStreet America was one of them in Illinois, to provide support to small businesses statewide who required assistance navigating billions of financial assistance dollars that were available from the state of Illinois, as well as the U.S. Small Business Administration, as a result of ARPA. MainStreet America, as I just noted, was identified as a hub to work with our MainStreet organizations across the state to perform intensive outreach to ensure that small and hard to reach businesses are aware of economic relief funds available. Additionally, these navigators provided one-to-one technical assistance to support these businesses in understanding how to access the relief, how to fill out applications, etc. Next slide. Now this what I'm showing you here, these pictures, this fund actually predates ARPA. But the city of Chicago has really doubled down its support of their distressed communities that had not received a lot of attention from city government in the past. This really demonstrates civic leaders considering the hardship that our Black and Brown entrepreneurs face to acquire and rehab spaces in Chicago's south and west sides. Areas, as I had indicated, had been previously experienced decades of disinvestment. This program dates back to 2016. The city of Chicago revised their zoning code to leverage funds generated by new development in and around the Loop, so our central business district, to catalyze investment in Chicago's west, southwest, and south sides. The Neighborhood Opportunity Fund uses these funds to support commercial corridors in Chicago underserved neighborhoods. Businesses and property owners may apply for grant funding to pay for the construction or rehabilitation of real estate and projects that support new or expanding businesses or cultural assets. The NOF Fund awards grants to projects that have a catalytic impact on the neighborhood and lead to the construction or rehabilitation of new and existing publicly accessible commercial spaces. For example, grocery stores, retail establishments, and or restaurants. NOF does not award grants for construction or rehabilitation of residential uses or manufacturing uses. Next slide, please. This is another really great example, and this is through the Cook County Land Bank. The Cook County Land Bank works to reduce and return vacant land and abandoned buildings back into reliable and sustainable community assets. As of 2022, the Land Bank has now begun to have a portfolio of commercial properties in their land bank. At one point, they only worked with residential properties. But this is yet again another opportunity where we have many of these vacant properties on the books that are in our communities that are not, being utilized to its highest and best use. This provides an opportunity for our small scale developers that may be located in or around our communities to get access to these properties and begin developing within their communities. Next slide. And finally, these are the resources to each one of the programs that I've just shared with you. Check out this resource list, but I would be remiss not to tell you to follow some of the additional sites that have been working on how to spend ARPA funds with an equity lens. I will refer you to the the National League of Cities, as Kelly mentioned earlier. I would also refer you to look at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. This is actually where this presentation was originally developed. I will drop their link in the chat. And finally, if you are really, really interested in understanding small business anti-displacement tools and how to make certain that you are ensuring that your small businesses can remain in place, check out the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network. I will also drop that in the link. I'm going to turn it over to my next colleague to start their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dionne. Christine. And Christine, Michelle, did you want to read the bio for Christine?
Oh, sure. Christine, there you are. Christine Tyson with Economic Development. She's the Economic Development Coordinator for the City of Eureka. We've heard from you a little bit already. Thank you. Christine provides support to the Economic Development Department, including helping to plan and develop economic projects, marketing, and researching information to implement the Eureka's Economic Development Plan. Christine helps implement programs that support industrial, office, or commercial development, business attraction and retention, and initiatives for small businesses. Currently overseeing the Eureka Visitors Center, She brings excitement and draws tourists and locals alike to the heart of Eureka. Working with community members in her hometown of Eureka has been not only fulfilling, but exciting to see the direction of Eureka and where they are headed. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? All
Yeah, I
right.
think so.
Okay. So thank you for having the City of Eureka and Eureka Main Street here hosting you guys. We wish, of course, that you were all here with us to share our beautiful city with you, but we are excited to talk a little bit about what we're doing with our ARPA funding this year, and I'm going to go right into it. Let's see here. I'm really excited to be here. I already said that, and we are using our ARPA funding to lift core businesses up after a rough couple of years through COVID-19 and this pandemic. First, I'm going to go into the Eureka Small Business Rent Relief Program, and we call it our Bridge Program. Next slide, please. I'm going to go into a little bit of the background on this one for you guys. The City of Eureka has set aside $500,000 of ARPA funds to provide grants for up to $7,500 for small businesses located within the City of Eureka. And this is to cover business owners' unpaid or pending rent. And we put a timeline between January 1st and April 30th of this year for that rent pay. We've offered this program before. Last year, when the pandemic was really at its strongest, it was a huge success, and we used our CARES Act funding for that. So we're repeating this again because it was so successful. Speaking with businesses after we did last year's Bridge program throughout the pandemic, businesses really stressed to us that their most important needs that they really need help getting paid were basic needs. So rent, you know, if they own the building, their mortgage, things like that. And we felt like it was the most appropriate way to help these businesses during this time. And our business's slowest time of year is January through April. So we felt that was most appropriate to get them through that slow time of year, excuse me, and providing them with sometimes their largest cost, being their rent or their mortgage during this time, is really something that we felt that could pull businesses through this hard time that they have really been going through in the last couple of years. I'll let you know, last year we assisted 53 businesses with grants up to $7,500, and we spent roughly about $336,000. And I said before, we spent that through CARES Act money there. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. I'll go over a little bit about how businesses, what they have to do to be eligible for this program that we've set up. Businesses must meet the following requirements. So for-profit businesses or a nonprofit entity that has been negatively affected by the pandemic, they have to show us a 20% or more reduction in gross revenue loss. And business owners do need to live in Humboldt County. They don't have to specifically live in Eureka, but they do have to live in the county of Humboldt. And then physical commercial addresses do have to be within city limits, and they do have to have a valid business license here in the City of Eureka. We can talk about that more later because I'll have some tips for you guys on that one. And businesses must have 20 or fewer full-time employees. And we do allow businesses to count those part-time employees as an equivalent. 2 part-time employees would equal 1 full-time employee. And then sole proprietors and single person companies are also eligible. And we do require that businesses have been in business prior to the pandemic. So we put a date of March 1st, 2020 on there for that. These grants are specifically for businesses that were created prior to the pandemic. And then also businesses with active code violations, home-based businesses and independent contractors are not eligible, and individuals that own or have an interest in more than one business can only do 1 grant. We have multiple business owners that, for example, own I think she owns now 4 restaurants in Eureka, and so she's only eligible for 1 grant, for example. I'm going to go a little bit over the documentation that we required for these grants. We required them to turn in a government ID proving address and information that aligns with the application that they turned in, all financial documentation. And so this year we required financials for their business for 2019, and then we were comparing those with 2020. And so this can be done by a few different ways. Tax returns, of course, are the easiest way, but profit and loss documents also are being accepted. We do get a huge support from our finance department on this one at the City of Eureka. We rely on them a lot to verify those financials for us. Rent releases and also mortgage paperwork is also required, showing how much their monthly rent or mortgages, for example. And then documentation about how many employees they have is required as well. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to go over the process a little bit of how this grant works. So first, of course, they fill out an application, and they have to provide all of the documents that I just read off earlier to us here in Economic Development. And then once the application is submitted, like I said, our finance department oversees that financial part of the grant, and Economic Development is really the one overseeing the other pieces of the grant here in our department, working with code enforcement. We're also working with business licensing. So it's a really huge group effort, very, very time consuming, but a huge reward for our businesses. And we're very committed to that. And then the final step in the application, we do have to get permission from the landlord if they are renting out of a building instead of owning one. We do need verification from that landlord with a W-9 form, as well as documentation from that landlord that they're willing to accept pay from the city on behalf of their business. Next slide, please. This one's just kind of a silly one I wanted to share with you guys. I just wanted to touch a little bit about, you can see our application here on the right. It's a pretty simple form. And then the left here is the front page of our city website, City of Eureka's website. And we really push this grant out through our social media platforms, as well as our news outlets. We put it all over our website. We presented to different commissions and of course, our council meeting, really to get the word out on this grant and into the hands of businesses. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so that is the basics of our bridge program grant. And now I'm going to move a little bit into a different grant that we are providing at the same time. This one is a new one. We did not do this one last year. Swan, you heard from Swan earlier. She is our main person on this grant. And so the City of Eureka has set aside $130,000 to provide grants up to $7,500 to support eligible art and culture related entities located within the City of Eureka that have been affected by COVID-19 in order to support their continued operations. And then entities, again, must demonstrate a 20% loss of income due to the pandemic. In this one in particular, they were looking at documents from 2019 with 2020 because we didn't do this one last year. So the financials on this one are a little different, but the grants are very similar on a lot of levels. Thanks for changing that slide. Okay, so what types of different entities were eligible? There we go. So live performance venue operators, performing arts organizations, art galleries, and motion picture theater operators. The businesses must, as a principal business activity, organize, promote, produce, manage, or host live concerts, comedy shows, theater productions, art exhibits, or other events by artists. And a cover charge through ticketing or front door entrance fee must be applied. And at least 70% of the entity's earned revenue is derived from cover charges or ticket sales. And then again, nonprofit art organizations and museums. So under that category, meaning a building in which objects of historical, scientific, artistic, or cultural interest are stored and exhibited. Or that organization provides programming across one or more of the following. So artistic fields, creative placemaking, dance, design, folk and traditional arts, music, media, theater, visual arts. So all of those are eligible. And then churches and religious institutions are not eligible for this particular grant. And then what are some of the eligibility requirements? It's very similar to the previous grant that I went over. They have to provide physical address. The physical address must be in the city of Eureka, and they must have an active business license. And the applicant must have been in business prior to the pandemic. So March 1st, 2020, again with the same date. And then again with the active code violations, they are not eligible. Next slide, please. So documents that were required that we made businesses turn in for this one, they went in with their application, tax returns from 19 and 2020, and then statement of what funds and what those would be used for, because this grant is a little different on what the funds can be used for. And then of course our W-9 form, again, from that landlord or the mortgagee. Next slide, please. So what can these funds be used for? The grant funds awarded under this program are used for general operating expenses. And then the intent of this program is to help art and culture related entities survive through COVID altogether. And what this grant is a little different. So they have our Art and Culture Commission has created a committee who has designated the use of funds if there are any leftover funds after the 130,000. So funds that are left over were actually going to be used for city-owned equipment for producing outdoor events in city parks, which we hope that art and culture community can use for outdoor events and different things, because I think you're going to see a change over time. With COVID happening, you know, things are going to start getting a little different in how we get back to our new normal. And we're hoping that, you know, creating spaces outdoors for people in different industries are going to help those industries come out from this, you know, hard 2 years that they've been going through. So that is my slides on these two grant programs. I wanted to leave a little room for questions. I know that Kelly mentioned earlier that we were going to have some room for that. And so we'd love to answer any questions, and I can talk a little bit more about anything that we've gone through, hardships and, you know, hurdles that we've had to jump over to get through for these grants. But ultimately, our businesses are super thrilled about these grants. They're very helpful, and it really just pulls them through. And we felt with our ARPA funding, that was the best option to help our businesses and many businesses right down in our Main Street district. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Christine. That is so awesome. I actually really want to share this with our city manager in Hanford. These are really great grants. So thank you. And Kelly, go ahead. I just wanted to say that really quickly.
Oh, no, do you want me to introduce
Gumaro.
Gumaro? I'm more than happy
I'm
to.
sorry. I heard Christine say she was turning it over to you, so I thought you were going to add to that. But yes, it looks like Gumaro is up. Gumaro Escarcega is the board president of California Main Street and the CEO of MainStreet Oceanside. Gumaro is an experienced Main Street program manager, small business owner, and chair of California Main Street Board of Directors. He holds a degree in public administration with a focus on city planning, embraces opportunities to build community, and recently welcomed a baby daughter to the world. Congratulations, Gumaro.
Thank you. She's a huge blessing. She's been amazing to us.
Absolutely.
And I have to report, we did give her some vaccinations this morning. So, and she took it like a champ. She was awesome. So just wanted to share that. Anyway, so yeah, so how do we leverage CARES and ARPA funds? We immediately started working with the city, and our counterparts here wish they were here, but they planned vacations before we could have get them here. But we did work a lot with the Chamber of Commerce here and our Economic Development Department with these programs. But before CARES and ARPA funds came in, we did start a campaign, Oceanside Strong, where we raised funds to give out mini grants to small businesses. And the whole idea behind that was to keep us relevant, keep us active with our businesses, and let the community support our local businesses. And I think we did a really good job with that, keeping our downtown alive. But this is what we're reporting right now is basically was the idea to stimulate our local economy through grants and shop local programs. The chamber and MainStreet were critical on bringing in partnership because of the reach that we have. We actually had 2 rounds of funding. If we go to the next slide. We had 2 rounds of funding, one with the CARES and one with the ARPA, with the total amount of the city council approved was $700,000 that came into different times. But we started this in 2020, and I believe the grant program that we started gave them the idea that we can take this job and actually take a percentage of this fee to keep our operations moving forward as well. And I have to say, this is probably one of the a lot of time being consumed and hard work is, giving out grants. It's probably the most rewarding program also because so many happy people were really involved in this. And so we were very excited to see the outcomes behind this. But, the grant worked in 3 different tiers. The first tier was those that were significantly impacted, had to close their doors. And it goes down to tier 3 as a, stay-home business and so on. We had the city was very big on inclusive and make sure that we reach businesses that reach the broader audience, which is all ages, which is, not bars or any of that will be able to apply for something like this. But they wanted to make sure that, we had an understanding that this needs to be supporting businesses that overall reaches the whole community. So that was something that was very well aware of this situation. We also made sure that they had an active business license. The city did void, I think the first year of business license to all the businesses, but they still had to register and make sure they submit their permit. We did a cross-reference with the city, Economic Development Department with the business license, and we reviewed P&Ls, for first round of money was the first 6 months of the impacts. And then the second round of money was the year to year, the impacts that they have made. Fortunately, our grants range from $1,000 to $7,500. And like I said, MainStreet administered a pot of money just for downtown businesses, and the chamber administered money for all the city of Oceanside businesses. So you see the way that we have at MainStreet that we can help out and get people to support our businesses. So there's really good opportunity there for us. There are some things that, there are some provisions that businesses need to make sure that they check off. So if we're able to let us know that they have a business license, they have a finances underway, they're reporting to their members of the chamber or MainStreet. So there are some provisions there that we had to let them know. So it worked out really well. I think we issued about 250 grants total for this small business grant program that we produced for the city. And we exhausted the funds pretty quickly. So that was a really good program. So moving to the next slide. And then, so these are all businesses that are very thankful to this program. they were so pleased to see some funding coming their way that helps them pay their rent or pay their staff too, or also merchandise. A lot of them, were having issues with merchandising because either they didn't have the capital to buy more merch to retail or to even offer to those that were supporting the businesses. So it was really well, and this was open to nonprofits too, and I'll display what the city also did for other nonprofit organizations as well. So move on to the next slide. So we also partner with the city in many ways. This is how we actually use some of this money to develop an outdoor patio. This is to support restaurants that were not able to do any outdoor dining space because they didn't have the space for it. So they actually kept they actually gave us a grant to purchase equipment such as tables, market umbrellas, chairs, etc., and to sanitize and maintain the cleanness of this patio. We actually, back when we first started this program, it was Monday through Friday from 10 to 3. We ended up finding out that Monday wasn't a great day, so we actually shifted the day and actually started from Tuesday to Saturday. The city allocated $51,000 to keep this program alive for about a year and a half or so. And again, this money, make sure they didn't make a profit, but we were able to keep our doors open and employ our employees. We ended up letting go about 20 employees when the CARES Act came in. I mean, with the COVID closure happened. So we ended up letting go of our event coordinator. We ended up letting go of like our staff for that manage all the events and all that stuff. And so we took a huge hit, but we were pretty resilient coming back. Happy to report that all the employees that were let go came back. So that was really nice to see. And this is actually just this program ended in February actually. So it was a really good program that we have. And move on to the next slide. This is how we utilize the outdoor patio. You see the center of this, that's our staff. That's Rick Wright in the center and Kathy Nykel. Those have attended some of the workshops here. And then Eric is our maintenance person as well on the left. But Taste of Oceanside utilize this to the left there. We are able to use this as for the events that we produce in downtown as well. And then to the right, if you see, this is actually City Hall where we at right now. There's a fountain on the right side. Those have been to Oceanside. It's in the core of downtown, but we leverage some of the open space that they had. The library loved it because they activated their patio there, and it was really well done. Where we kept our downtown clean and safe, obviously using protocols through COVID. And a lot of the businesses were grateful that we were able to step up and do something for them as well, just to offer them outdoor dining for their guests. So next slide. And then also shop local programs. We started immediately when the pandemic hit, how we can leverage some of the funding there. The city and the chamber, we chamber and MainStreet partnered to get the city to invest in our downtown and also the city. How do we can stimulate our economy? So the city actually invested about $60,000 total for the last 2 years to activate programs and stimulate our local economy through small businesses. So what do we do? So a lot of the things that we've done, MainStreet does a lot of programming, a lot of events. So this Oceanside Chamber of Commerce did not want to do that, so we just let them run with the first year funding. We ended up sharing, I think we ended up getting 20, they ended up getting 10. But they only started a gift card program when they administered. And then we developed a coupon book where we actually gave the business a stipend to offset some of those specials that they're going to be offering to the consumer. And so that actually created a really good buzz for downtown. It was a virtual coupon book that we created. We basically handed out cash to small businesses. We did their window decorating contest. We also did a Oceanside Holiday Challenge, which is a scavenger hunt, it's an app-based scavenger hunt. That one we did last winter, and it was a really well successful. A lot of the customers that were coming out. I think we had a total of over 1,500 missions completed. That means that there was 1,500 touches that these businesses received. And then we ended up giving out prizes, cash prizes, packed package deals, electric bikes. We were giving out some pretty cool prices to the community. And again, we're trying to support. Our mindset was what can the community need as well, not just our businesses, but also our community. And we got a really good traction. And if you guys were here at the marketing for farmers market, how our numbers are almost doubled, or I mean, our numbers for marketing increased by like 30 to 40% in some cases during this pandemic. So we were pretty straightforward and really robust on what we were doing here. We also reintroduced our sip and shop activity here in downtown Oceanside. That's where we have retailers partner or link with a restaurant or a brewery. And when I say restaurants where I partner with restaurants to create a cocktail to offer tastings. So it was a spirit license that we did. And I'm actually trying to move more in that direction. You know, we have a lot of breweries in our cities, but they're not all located in downtown. So I feel like we should continue to keep our restaurants, you know, active, and they cannot offer tastings because of the small kitchen or so on. So we actually figured out a way to get cocktails to retail stores, and we managed everything from them. So this was really good success so far, and we're hoping to do more cocktails tastings throughout all of our events that we're doing. Also, during the pandemic, we produced a makers market. We started them in 2020, and then we felt like 2021 we needed to do something to keep our doors open. So we developed with partnership with the city. The city did not give me an event permit here, but since we have a strong relationship, I told them I'll take the liability on anything. I'll take anything that happens, and they really accepted that. And happen to have one of our makers market there every month from January through June of this last year, and it's a huge hit. We had about 40 vendors. I think that one market towards the end, as the protocols were being reduced or the mandates were being reduced, we had up to 50 makers out there during events. But the cool thing about the makers market is that during the expansion of the farmers market, that was our seed to attract new vendors to come to our farmers market. So we wanted to give our farmers market another opportunity to develop a new kind of sector. Well, makers became another sector for us at the farmers market, which is a perfect pairing with farmers and crafters that do a lot of great work out there in the community. So that's basically the supporting our local micro businesses in Oceanside, because we do have a big micro business market in our city, especially with our Sunset Market and Farmers Market being active. And next slide. So this just gives you a picture of how we use and leverage our funding here. So like I said, the outdoor patio, we received 51,000. Our shop local initiatives is 30,000 from last year. It's actually total of 60,000. Last year, MainStreet Oceanside received majority of the funding. We actually just paid out the chamber $2,500 for their marketing services that they offered. But they let us run with it, and we actually ended up making about another $6,000 based on little small fees that we asked the businesses. Where MainStreet is a strong believer of sustainability, and no matter what we do, there has to be some buy-in and there's skin in the game. And so we always either put a small fee into something just to get them involved and take this serious with us too. A total of $700,000 was issued in small business grants. Remember, MainStreet and Chamber gets 10% of that, so total remainder was $630,000. And then nonprofits actually got $1 million allocated for grants, and they just dispersed that money about a month ago. So I heard nonprofits getting up to $38,000 of money to support them. So it was really, really well programmed there. Our tourism company, will Visit Oceanside, they actually received about $300,000. This is the first round for the CARES Act. And that money was, again, to see how we can become relevant and keep tourism alive in our city. And I believe our city was one of the highest visitors and during the COVID or the pandemic in San Diego County. So we did really well during this COVID. They also, sand is an important element for our beach community and for tourism. So they actually invest $43,000 on that end as well. And then other programs that they did was hire local program, and then also targeting low-income families, and then homelessness programs also. It's at $600,000, which they're finishing up a 50-bed shelter at one of their old fire stations in the city of Oceanside. So they actually are repurposing this building for low-income families that are experiencing homelessness. So it's really quite fascinating what the city has been really involved with. We've been excited here. I think our numbers show, we had a net gain last year of 22 new businesses. And our demand continues to grow in our city, and we're busy right now. So I think that ends my slides. If not, if you want to see one more, oh, there it is. So yeah, so this is again partnered with Economic Development and the Chamber of Commerce, but we are very pleased with our partnership with the city and how much they have invested in our small business community.
Thank you, Gumaro. I appreciate all that information. Let's see. Is this
That's me.
Oh yes, Kelly. I think we've got 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
I was going
Kelly?
to close out with a couple of examples from other places in the country, but I just congratulations, both Christina and Gumaro. Well, Gumaro, double congratulations, but like really great and successful partnerships. I wanted to offer just a couple of perspectives from elsewhere that maybe look at ARPA in a different use. Also, there've been a lot of questions about, can I use ARPA to fund a Main Street role? Well, the city of Ferndale, Washington did, and they also have produced on their website and really just outlined their MOU is available there. So I'm going to share this as an example with all, because if you really wanted to look at how they kind of structured the justification for funding capacity for Main Street, it's a great example. So that wanted to point that one out because it had been a question that had come up a lot. Next slide, please. Wanted to also point out this very innovative use about how we leverage this funding from Macon, Georgia. They put money to both Newtown Macon, which is the Main Street NCDC entity, and Historic Macon Foundation, for both organizations to do work on the revitalization of commercial buildings and housing. Newtown Macon is more focused on kind of commercial corridor revitalization, Historic Macon more focused on the housing. Both organizations leveraged the commitment from the county to those projects with Knight Foundation funding. So it essentially got doubled. And what's really interesting about Newtown Macon's approach here is they're using this, they're not just putting this money into the buildings, they're training local entrepreneurs to become property developers with this funding. So, this we obviously could dive much further into, but I did want to point it out as a really interesting approach. And then finally, I have a couple more for you here that are also bigger ticket approaches to using ARPA. As I said, capital improvements are now pretty clearly allowed in the most recent final rule. And some communities had already gotten a start on that. On the left here, this is a streetscape improvement project. It's actually a $7 million project that's using $2.5 million worth of ARPA funds in Rock Island, Illinois, to improve their downtown. And then on the right is Walla Walla, Washington, which is a Main Street community. And they had this pre-existing streetscape or downtown improvement plan for a plaza. And through their ARPA funds, they committed to it. And so the Heritage Square Park, again, it's a $2.5 million project with that. So I wanted to highlight these as the possibilities of ARPA, that you can go bigger with the vision if the city is interested in supporting something like that. But I ran through that extremely quickly so that we could be respectful of others' time, and just mentioning the other links that we had previously shared here. So that's it. Oh, yes, but that small business report at the end there, the last link, Dionne and I previously participated in a webinar on that. There's way more ideas in there if you really need to generate ideas and conversation around this.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Christine, Gumaro, and Dionne. We appreciate all of this information. I know we don't have time for questions, but if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can make sure your questions get answered. But again, thank you all so very much. That was really informative.